Great, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee for those taking part here in West Offices and also those watching online. First agenda item is declarations of interest. So I'll give a couple of seconds in case any councillors want to declare any additional interest. So none to declare today, which then takes us straight on to item 2, which is public participation. And we have one registered speaker today, Councillor Webb. And as you know, you've got 3 minutes to talk to us. So welcome and straight over to you.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. I wouldn't normally speak at Staffing Matters and Urgency, but I felt this warranted comment. First, it relates to leadership in how well the council are or are not looking after York's most vulnerable children. Secondly, the public interest around costs at the City of York Council. And thirdly, the worrying trend in erratic decisions when it comes to children's services over the last 3 years. On my first point, children thrive on stability, and I'm pretty certain that different departments responsible for delivering services also thrive on stability as well. These are some of the most important functions any council administration is responsible for, and yet sadly, how they are run from the top has been in a constant state of flux for years now. This is due to the council leader travelling down one political cul-de-sac after another in doomed attempts to divert attention from the scandal of his bumper payoff for the former chief exec. This payoff included unnecessary payments decided at this meeting, a meeting in which he chose not to declare that the officer in question was taken into an employment tribunal. On my second point around public interest, of course, the public were keen to hear why you had chosen to spend their money meant to be spent on public services and on this payout. But at this point, and I stress only at this point, it became apparent that there was a senior management reshuffle to attempt to offset this huge cost. This produced the role of Corporate Director of People, a merging of the Corporate Director of Adult Services and the Corporate Director of Children's Services. And at the time, I asked the Executive Member for Children and Young People whether they were confident that this was a smart move, and they said yes. I asked the Corporate Director of People, and they said yes. No surprise, obviously. No one seemed remotely worried that suddenly there was a huge reliance on just one person becoming responsible for the council's 2 most important services, accounting for 2/3 of the council's budget. With this and other decisions in the Directorate, we remain concerned about the safety of young people in this city as a result. And all this to save face and try and make a self-inflicted problem go away. My concern with your decision moving forward is this. How are senior leadership, how are your colleagues, how are staff below senior leadership expected to deliver when there is absolutely no stability or consistency? When they know the latest diktat or guidance will likely change. People know change is inevitable, but constant change indicates chaos behind the scenes and doesn't ensure services are working for our children and young people. This is not how effective organisations work. The explanation and attempted justification for these constant changes would be laughable if it were not a more serious issue. This is my final point, erratic decision-making. You regularly ask Labour to work constructively with you for the good of the city. So my constructive suggestion to you is this. Whatever you decide to do, leave it alone for at least 2 years, give it a chance to succeed. More of the same, and would-be officers looking at the soap opera that is York, is not going to do much for our recruitment prospects or our residents, and it's not going to do them any good whatsoever. York deserves the best officers, and recent decision-making is a surefire way to make them not want to work here. Let's change the approach now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that I know we'll take into account when we consider the next agenda item. So that takes us on to agenda item 3, which is the People Directorate Restructure. It starts on page 3 and runs to page 20. And I'll ask Ian to introduce this report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I won't take you through all the report. Hopefully it's reasonably self-explanatory, but I think just to start with some background. Clearly there have been 2 sort of previous restructures. in recent times. I'm not going to comment on the first one because I was part of that one and it wasn't my report, if you like. But just to be clear, the financial impact of that first one, which the public speaker did refer to, is unaffected by anything that is here. And you'll see in the papers, it does talk about that stage one restructure and the ongoing financial savings. And I appreciate there was a cost in terms of pensions to pay out as well, but the ongoing savings of 125,000, those are not affected by anything here. In terms of the most recent restructure, which took place, I think just to make it clear also that in terms of the issue, in terms of frequent restructures, clearly once I got the job as head of paid service, there was a requirement on me personally to look at the structure. And to make it clear, it is the head of paid services responsibility to actually propose a structure to elected members. Now, clearly, I need your consent to that, but actually, to be very clear on it, you also need my approval to that, because I wouldn't bring a report which I didn't support. Now, clearly, you don't hope to get into that position, but that is a fact in law and legislation. It makes it clear it's the head of paid service who brings forward restructure proposals, unless, of course, they are affected themselves and other procedures kick in that regard. In terms of the first restructure, clearly we did go with the corporate director people. That was widely consulted across many different people. The report makes it clear in terms of the inability to obviously recruit to that post, and obviously the post holder left shortly after that restructure. The assistant director in children's post we were not able to recruit to as well. And clearly there is a difficult market out there in children's services and to a slightly lesser extent in terms of adult services. So obviously in the light of those two roles, I've had to consider, well, what should we do? And much of what the public speaker and Councillor Webb said, I completely agree with. These are services which are of fundamental importance. They represent 3/4 of the council's budget. Strong leadership, consistent leadership is absolutely essential in that regard. And we have to prioritise these areas. And I would just like to thank some of the people who are currently leading those areas for the work they have done, the improvements they have brought. Clearly sitting under the corporate director people, and you can see it on the current charts, there were two other directors. And again, I'd specifically like to thank them for their contribution that they've made during this time. And we have brought in an interim director of children's services. Clearly, things have moved on a little bit. We've got the two roles to fill. We've had a look. We've spoke to lots of people. We've consulted with staff, consulted with the unions. And there is a proposal in the paper, clearly, which is option 3, to go for creating the 2 corporate directors, one for adults, one for children. I think I should stress on the adults, since the previous restructure, that it's become clear that when you look at what's happening in the health system, the need for strong leadership in terms of our role, which will relate to changes in the Humber Coast and Vale ICS and the creation of a York place, so the 6 places can be created within that region, and our role working with health partners in that. We need some very dedicated, strong leadership, and so you'll see that the corporate director of adults also has integration there, and they will be expected to very much lead on aspects in respect of that area. On children's, absolutely important we have strong, consistent leadership. We need now to go out to what we recommend as 2 posts, one corporate director in terms of children education, and then another senior role in terms of director of children's services. And that reflects the importance to those services, and also reflects the fact that if we were to try and go out, for example, an assistant director children's, evidence shows that we're not paying that market rate. So we need to move that in to a director level. Each of the options we presented sets out different aspects, and clearly option 1 is looking at the current structure and maintaining that, and the report takes you through some of the issues with that. Option 2 broadly reflects the sort of interim structure we've had, where there's 3 people reporting direct to myself, and as I say, option 3 is the recommended structure. All the structures have the same number of chief officers in place, so there are 6 in terms of adults and children's, and I think that's just about right in terms of the level of resource there. There are some slight differences in terms of the cost, but in reality, the cost would probably be the same, because whilst option 1 has a lower base cost, you would almost certainly have to put market forces on that, and that would take it to a similar level of cost. So that cost is set out in terms of in the report. We would be funding that cost clearly from some additional money which currently assumed within children's budget going forward. Clearly that is slightly subject to the council report, but clearly we also think we would better fund that irrespective of what happens. The need to sort of fill these posts is absolutely crucial. The need for strong leadership, absolutely crucial. The need to, hopefully have stability. And nobody would predict the future, would they, in terms of given what's happened the last sort of 2 years. But it's certainly not my intention to come back unless I absolutely had to with a further report on the structure. So just to pick up the point that was made at the beginning in terms of stability, I absolutely agree. We need to try and have stability. We need to get people in who will come and stay. Clearly there are 2 posts that we'd have to go out to advert for, which are the ones in children's services. The other post in adults would go through our internal HR process. I'll stop there, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. So open it for any comments or questions at this stage. Councillor Hook.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Could officers please clarify the savings which have been achieved through the management restructures which have taken place since this meeting approved those changes?
Ian.
In terms of the original savings, so they're set out in paragraph 10. So there have been 2 papers which have set out changes. So in terms of the initial savings, which related to, say, stage 1, which was effectively concerned myself, the previous chief executive, and the current chief finance officer. There were 3 posts, went into 2. As I say, that wasn't my report. I wasn't part of that because I was affected. But that had a 125,000 saving set out in paragraph 10. The next stage, which was changes across the corporate leadership group, saved around 80,000, and again that's in paragraph 10. So they're the 2 savings that have taken place prior to this paper.
Thank you.
Right, and that's annualised, is it?
They are permanent, ongoing savings. The first one, you do have to offset the cost of the pension, which was part of that report. So that will clearly take some years to materialise in full, but that is there in a permanent basis. And as I say, that related to effectively 3 specific officers going into 2.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Corbett.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've got a few questions, but just coming back on Councillor Hook's well-read question there. Can you explain to anybody watching why the £40,000 extra that we're going to be spending now on top-level managers is not the same as the savings that we made on top-level managers? Why is it somehow different money?
Ian.
Well, all money is money. The reality is that the budget has already taken those savings. So in terms of our assumed budget, we have taken out those savings. So if you're focusing on the 80,000, that was included in last year's budget papers, I believe. So that budget would have been reduced. So you either go for a specific growth proposal, specific to this, which you could do, or already there is investment within the budget papers for adults and children's, and we're effectively proposing that we use some of that to do that. But the cost is the same, you know, wherever you fund it from, there's a £40,000 cost.
That's a good one.
Oh, thanks. Oh, actually, Mike's still on. So would you say that the first restructure failed?
Which one are you talking about? The stage one?
Where we went
stage
to
two?
a corporate director of people?
No, I wouldn't say it failed. I mean, you have to react to situations. We have to do something. Clearly, we are in the position we are in, where the post order left. We weren't able to recruit to that. So we have to react to the circumstances and take action appropriately. The cost would be the same, whatever you did really, because you're not going to be able to fill those posts without market forces.
So if it didn't fail, in what way was it successful?
Well, it touched upon lots of other aspects in terms of the council structure. So other aspects which included creation of director, customer and communities, the creation in terms of the place roles, for 2 directors in that area, other posts, and in my view, I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, but I disagree with that statement. I think it's been successful in terms of the organisation of the council. Now, clearly, we've got in this particular area to take action, but I would say some of the changes, even in people, have worked very well. We've brought together people services in a way they didn't operate together collectively, and I would pay tribute actually to the leadership who are currently in those roles, particularly the 2 directors who are in permanent roles and the interim director of children's. I regularly have meetings with all 3 of them. All 3 of them regularly are working together in a way that didn't take place. And so actually, and it's covered in the report, there are aspects of bringing people services together where you can get consistency, you can get better commissioning, and we want to retain that. What hasn't worked is the fact that somebody left and we weren't able to recruit. And so that aspect, we need to review it, and whether it's admitting that we've got it slightly wrong or we need to do something different. You know, I would rather do something different and get on and create the roles and we bring people in than we continue to just insist that we'll stick with the previous options.
I think you'll find I asked a question rather than made a statement of opinion, but never mind. Moving on. So if it was so successful, why are we having to abandon it now? Why was it not sustainable? How long did it last for, that restructure?
Well, I think it's set out in the paper. I mean, it's quite clear that in terms of what I think, there were aspects that were successful. What did not work, somebody left. We weren't able to recruit into 2 specific roles, one of which was never actually part of a restructure. It was always on the structure. It's been on our structure for many years. So in that regard, we have to deal with it. We have to deal with circumstances and move on.
So, but you'd accept that it wasn't sustainable?
It could have been sustainable. No, I don't accept that.
But we're having to change it though.
Well, I've put the options forward. There are 3 options. My preferred option is recommendation 3. But you could maintain the current structure. It's not my preference to do so. My preference is recommendation 3.
And so that would leave us in a position where we've got nobody in that role, which is for looking after our most vulnerable children and adults.
Yeah, and that's why I'm recommending option 3.
So okay, we're not going to find common ground here, but it seems clearly unsustainable. Can I ask why we've gone, given that the director of people was a corporate director, and that role has now been halved, in effect, split into adults and children, why they're still at corporate directors rather? So why are we offering the same money essentially for half the job?
The money, and Helen might want to come into that goes through our grading system in terms of evaluation, and both roles have been evaluated as coming out at corporate director level. I think there's probably an argument that the previous role, the corporate director people, would have needed market forces and actually would have taken you above our existing corporate director grade. And I think the recruitment process has highlighted that.
Okay.
Helen?
In response to the job evaluation, obviously that does look, as you know, the sizing of those jobs. And that was one thing that was put through the system, as it were, through the job evaluation system. And it was still confirmed that, yes, there was in there, as Ian's actually confirmed, we have more within there since the former director, corporate director of people. We've got the health side, so that was evaluated. So it is a slightly different job description. They ask different job descriptions as well. There's certainly more in there. And on challenging them, yes, the size of the jobs was still substantial enough within that. And obviously job evaluation looks at all of the finances, it looks at the structures in terms of the people and the scope and influence both within the council and outside of the council. So I was confident that those evaluations have been done accurately, and there was a challenge there as well.
How close were they to director level?
I'm sorry, I don't have that detail, but I was confident from my officer I'd offered a challenge on that. I don't have a grade line, I don't have that information with me. It's
Okay. How do you decide between director and corporate director then? If
there's effectively a point scoring, which sounds quite rudimentary, but there's a point scoring within a job evaluation situation. So that will define, and we've already got that well established. And obviously there's comparator in terms of our existing corporate director as well. So we've got a base mark to know that actually that's what directors are and that's what corporate directors are.
Okay, so we could see what the points came to, and then from that we could work out how close it was to the
We
director
could
level.
indeed, if that was needed.
Could we have that information?
If that's our policy on that, I could certainly confirm that.
Well, it's, you know, it's taxpayers' money. I don't see why we wouldn't be able to.
It's not something we disclose anyway to all of our employees. So
Yeah.
No, I don't want the, you know, we're not talking about an individual here. We're talking about the roles and how they've been evaluated.
but they're identifiable by people as well.
Well, it's identifiable because it's in the papers how much money they're earning. It's, you know, it's quite a fair question for the taxpayers of the city to know how the job's been evaluated at that level, because we seem to have moved into this era of corporate directors instead of directors, assistant directors and heads of service, which is where we used to be. So I just want to know what the basis for that is. That would be very useful.
Just to help, rather than in a sense do it by individual, you could have and publish against the pay policy what a corporate director, what a director, what an assistant director is in general terms, including numbers of reports, budgetary responsibility, which if that could come round to members of this committee sooner and then could be part of that document, if there could be a way to do that. Sorry,
I must have misunderstood. I thought you said you evaluated the job on a point system, not the person.
We do evaluate the job, not the person.
But that's all I'm after. That's
yeah.
Okay. And some other information that we've been pushing for a long time. I think maybe about 6 months ago, one of these committee meetings, I asked for an organogram of the management structure within the council. So from chief operator level down, all the way down to grade 12s. So how many we have, where they all work. We've been trying to get that information and we've been told it's not readily available. Is there any reason why we don't know where all our managers are and how many we've got and why that information can't be shared?
No, that should be available. I mean, you've got extracts in terms of charts in this report of 4 people. We've got that for different areas of service, so absolutely we should be able to provide that.
We've been asking for officers to provide us with that information and they're saying it's not available. They're saying maybe we could get it later this month. Well, clearly it should be available.
Sorry. There's a transparency report that we're required to do every year, and I know that this is the time of year that we replace it, and that I do know that that's being looked at the moment, so it should be published in the next couple of weeks.
But surely at any point where we ask how many managers, how many grade 12s, how many grade 13s, we've got how many ADs, have we got how many directors, surely you should be able to just give us that information.
Yeah.
Well, we've been asking for 6 months now.
I'm not aware of that request, so.
Okay, because obviously within this management restructure, we have to look at the overall management of the council to see where it fits. And we've not been able to do that.
In terms of, if you can let me know who you've been asking, and I'll follow that up. In terms of the chief officer structure, that will be set out in previous reports. In terms of the previous restructure, would have had a full chief officer structure, so that's all available. In terms of heads of service, that should be all available, because linked to the restructure, which I talked about the previous one, we have reviewed the heads of service structure underneath all of those chief officers. So they should all have that information there, readily available. In terms of heads of service, again, just to be clear, that is the head of paid service responsibility. It's not for elected members in terms of the heads paid service structure, albeit obviously members approve budgets as well. So yeah, we should be able to provide all that information.
Thank you very much.
And just one final, and this is a statement, and it's to you really, Chair. I think it's shameful that we're in this position. The restructure was a fudge to try and cover up and make savings for how much it cost us to get rid of the previous chief executive, which clearly was done for your political convenience. That's the auditors saying that, not me. And in the interim, it has exposed some of the most vulnerable people in this city to great risk.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. Obviously, we're not surprised you that I don't agree with what you have just said. To pick up the earlier points, for me, the People Directorate structure in front of us is all about making sure that you do bring in that permanence and strong leadership in areas that represent a significant amount of spend. But also incredibly important services for children and adults. And I think we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can, which option 3 outlines a number of reasons why that moves us in that direction. Question that I've got, which is probably for Helen in terms of the recruitment process, and in asking this makes no judgment about those previously doing the work, but paragraph 34 talks about North Yorkshire County Council carrying out the external recruitment exercise, and I know for a variety of reasons why that can make sense. I wonder though, given Ian's points about the 2 previous recruitments not leading to successful outcomes, whether you could bring to the appointments committee a range of options, including North Yorkshire County Council, other private sector recruiters, just to make sure that we are following as robust and advertised process as possible, given those comments that I've just made about how key these appointments are, and that you could then pick that up with the appointments committee to make that final judgment with Ian. I don't know where that sits as well.
Just yeah, I think just in terms of that, we are looking to progress that appointment. The adverts are all ready to go, so we've already got North Yorkshire informally. Obviously, we haven't necessarily committed them to it, but they've got the previous information, they've got everything, so they're ready to go fairly quickly. So obviously, if you wanted something to come back on that just might slow that process up, but we could send something round if you want.
Yeah, I think if the appointments committee, presumably the recommendation is for an appointments committee of 3 councillors, if that information could go around to that committee and those members could have a discussion rather than come back here, and then at least they could have a look, and I appreciate there are pros and cons of different ones, and then perhaps once they've had that conversation, whether that whole issue could come back to this committee at some point to have a look. I know costs vary, the actual service that they offer varies hugely, but actually maybe it is a good time to just have a look in the round. I know previously there's always been concerns that some external recruiters cost a lot, but it's at what point you justify that and for what role, so it's probably worth a look.
Yeah, just to say we did, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I think it was about 6 months ago, we did do a bit of a cost comparison with different private sector firms, so we can dust that off and maybe speak to a few more as well.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Hook.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on the statements that children's services is really important, could someone please say more about how children's services particularly will be supported through these particular proposed reforms?
Yeah, I mean, very wide-reaching question because there's lots of things. I mean, I think there have been lots of improvements made in children's service over the last couple of years, and again, you know, I pay testimony to the two people who departed in terms of their contribution in that regard. Since then, obviously, we've had an interim in terms of children's services, but also one of the current directors on the current structure, they have some aspects of responsibility for children's services, and they've worked incredibly hard, I would say, trying to find some solutions for our most vulnerable children. So moving forward, clearly, there's a need for stability, to get the right people into those roles. We are not unique in terms of, there is a turnover of children's sort of directors. So, if you look through adverts every week, you will see sort of directors of children's services jobs. So they are, there is a competitive market. But if we can get the right people into those roles, what the leadership team have been doing is trying to look at supporting social workers in particular over the last few months to create the right environment, create the right support systems that they need, to put in the right administrative support. So actually recently they've put additional business support in to help social care workers, and lots of other improvements which clearly I think could be reported through the respective scrutiny committees. And I would pay tribute as well to the current interim director of children's services, who I think has done a fantastic job actually in terms of making many further improvements and bringing new knowledge into that service. And just to give you my personal commitment is that we should aspire to have a fantastic children's service, should aspire to be outstanding, and I see no reason why we shouldn't aim to get to that point. That will take us some time, but we absolutely should get there.
Councillor Coben.
Just following on from that point, obviously the last Ofsted inspection was terrible. How confident are you that if Ofsted come in tomorrow, then we'll be getting at least a good assessment?
I don't think anybody would predict what the assessment is in terms of Ofsted. I think improvements have been made. Clearly, the last sort of inspection that was done highlighted areas of improvement. I think a lot of those areas have been tackled. That is not to say it's not without challenge, though there are still areas. The recruitment of social care workers is difficult. It's difficult for all authorities. The pandemic hasn't helped in that regard, and clearly has led to a number of issues in children's services. But I am confident that the team, the leadership involved, are absolutely committed to actually make those improvements. But it would be wrong to say that we are perfect. There is still further to go. This structure aims to deal with that, and we need to keep investing in our children's services.
It wasn't really perfect, but good. Do you think we get a good?
I'm not going to get drawn into giving an answer to that.
Thank you very much. So we've got in front of us the recommended way forward, which is option 3, and that's obviously set out in the papers, including on page 3. So I'll give a couple of seconds then, if I could please see those in favour of accepting that recommended option. Thank you very much. And just to recall, whether it's an abstention or a vote against. An abstention. Thank you very much. So that's a clear consensus in favour of accepting option 3. That then takes us through onto item 4, urgent business. I've not been notified of any, so just checking with Robert to nod or shake. No, so no urgent business. And then that takes us through to the work plan, which is listed as item 5 on page 21 to 22. And I'll go to Helen.
The next meeting on the 15th of February, we'll be bringing the deferred paper from the amendment of the discretions policy statement. It's called there, but I've renamed this and given more clarity following some questions, and we said we'd do this one as an in-person. So that paper is going to be coming in February, and then I think I'd mentioned at the last meeting, likely be the May meeting, will have the workforce demographics as at the end of March 2022.
Thank you very much. So noting those two additions to the work plan, Councillor Cobain.
So, yeah, sorry, Helen, what were they again? The pensions one, and when's the demographics coming up?
May, be likely May.
Thank you.
And what was the pensions one?
It's titled in January as amendment to the discretions policy statement to allow for salary sacrifice shared cost ABCs. That's coming 15th of February, yes. It was indeed, yeah. That was a virtual meeting in January to an in-person in February.
Thank you very much. So we're noting the work plan and those updates. That's the final item for today's meeting. So thank you all for joining us.